Welcome to micro lecture 5.1 in the Legal and Governance series. In this one we will discuss network governance. In the construction sector we will provide some examples and look at the consequences that are there. As indicated, we will do two things. We will provide some examples. They are in the paper by Voordijk and others. And we will also look into some recent research in the consequences of network governance for business competitiveness, and that's the paper by Kung and Shen. So let's start with the paper by Voordijk, Haan and Joosten. We know from the previous lectures that governance relations are usually market relations in the construction sector, and here we provide some examples where networks are chosen. So there are structures with a dominant actor leading a relatively stable alliance, and of course we know that we call them network structures. We also know from the previous lectures that usually the construction sector has specialization in the form of task specialization. Specific companies specialize in doing a certain type of work. Now these alliances that we discuss here, they specialize in product specialization. So they focus on a specific type of product that they more or less sell on the market. So if you compare that to, for instance, the car industry, it looks pretty much more similar than the traditional construction sector. We see different parties that can play a dominant role in such a network. And the paper discusses three different types of actors that are dominant. There is one example where a manufacturer of materials, so a supply firm that delivers materials for a construction firm, is leading the coalition. Another example where a contractor or a building company is leading the coalition, but also an example where a design firm, so a firm with architects and developers, leads the coalition. Before we discuss the different examples, it's good to think back on why we would look for network governance as a way to improve the functioning of our production systems. So this is the slide from micro lecture 3.1. It is about why we would develop network relations as opposed to market conditions that are traditionally dominant. Several reasons. You can integrate design and production. They are traditionally separated, but if you integrate them, you can adapt the design and you can optimize the design to the production from the start. Of course, you can reduce transaction costs. We've been discussing this quite extensively. Selection, bargaining, monitoring costs are the most important ones that can be reduced if we move from markets to networks. We can improve options for learning and innovation. We can share resources of the different partners and make production more efficient. And of course, an important reason would be to reduce costs of failure. In traditional systems we have lots of costs of failure, and they can be reduced by improving the cooperation between the different partners. Of course, all these things can also be achieved in hierarchy, so doing a lot of the work inside one company, but we also learned that there is amount uncertainty and complexity, and they make it difficult to do all the work in one company. Now the first example that is provided is that of Unidec Volumebouw, and this is the name that the company had when the paper was written. Currently the name of the company is Unibouw. Volumebouw is a Dutch word. It indicates volume building, and so it indicates that their large volumes are built in a quick way. This alliance is led by the manufacturer of the different materials. So the manufacturer of the different materials that are used for building the buildings, they kind of lead the building process, but also the design. So as you can see from the examples that are provided in the pictures, the design is rather simple, and the design is more or less adapted to the materials that are provided by the materials manufacturer. So they use specialized materials, they use them over and over again, and they use fixed partners to do the actual building process, and also they themselves hire architects that do the work in terms of designing the buildings. But of course the idea of design is that it's very limited. It's not fancy design, it's rather strict design in terms of rather simple buildings. This enables them to do a lot of their work in prefabrication. So 95% of the work is done in their own factories and not on site when the actual building is erected. This enables them to work in a very speedy way, so very quickly. And what the company does is it actually provides, or it looks for a specific market niche with the product that they bring to the market. So they don't tell anyone, well, we can build any building you want. No, we have a specific type of products that we sell. If you are interested in these type of products, we are the ones to choose from, because we can do it quickly and efficiently. The fact that they brought a product to the market is also illustrated by the fact that they were one of the first companies in the Netherlands that used radio commercials in order to sell their products. Now, you would not expect radio commercials from an ordinary construction firm, because their marketing is connected to people that are actually looking in the sector. But this company went on the public market with radio commercials to sell their products. The pictures that you saw on the previous slide were from the beginning of the company when they entered the market. Currently we see a development that is labeled as product diversification. So they develop not one typical product, but they develop a range of 3 types of products. So you can choose for compact, as they name it, which is basically the standard, simple, cheap way of building the building. In complete, you have a more diverse choice in the materials that are used, and there is some form of design adapted to your specific wishes of your, as you are the client. And in comfort, the design is more prominent, and it looks more similar to what you would expect in a traditional building process, but still you only choose from products, from materials that are delivered by the materials firm that is leading the coalition. So you see, development of products doesn't mean that you have only one product that you sell on the market. Of course, this is something that we also see in other types of industries. For instance, the car industry, you have different models. You have cheaper and more expensive ones, even within one company that is on the market. So you see the same development here in this network. The second example in the paper is that of a Holderwijk construction company. If you look at the remnants of this company on internet, you will find that they were very successful in the first years and during the time that the paper was written. In the Dutch economic crisis, that also was very important for the construction sector. Let's say between 2010 and 2015, they had a difficult time and they went bankrupt, but they are on the market again. What they do is that this the construction company is really leading the network here. So what they do, they bring alternative designs on the market with a limited flexibility and a fixed group of subcontractors that they work with. So there are alternative designs, but they are specific designs, just as a model of a car. You can compare it with that. There is, within the design, there is some flexibility in terms of the materials that you use, but the design as such is preset. This is also called like shopping from a catalog. You can compare it to that. And this way of production is also known as catalog building. Of course, there is some design in the specific designs, but it's more standardized in terms of how it's used. So it's more comparable to industrial design than to design in the construction sector. So it's not design as a form of art, but it is design made useful in terms of producing in a more efficient way. So if you look at the website of the company, you can see what this catalog means. There are different examples of types of houses that you can choose from. Within these types, you can still look for different styles using different type of materials. But again, it is a limited range of products that you choose from. And of course, the benefits of organizing production in this way is that you're not over and over building prototypes, as we have been discussing previously, but that it is more like building small series. Of course, if you compare it to the car companies, these are still very limited series, but they are series, and that means that the people that are involved, the durable partners, they get experience in doing things in this way, so that will make it more efficient. There will be less mistakes, so the costs of mistakes will be reduced, and basically they provide the benefits that you get from working together in a network and building more series production rather than unique buildings or prototypes. Now the third example is that of an alliance that is dominated by a design firm. It's the example of Takenaka as a company. It's a Japanese company, but it's also operating in Europe and in the Netherlands. And as you can see from their logo, it is the subtitle is Architecture, Engineering and Construction. So yes, they are traditionally a design firm, but they do a lot more. They do the engineering of the building, and they kind of deliver the construction. They don't do the actual construction themselves. They have partners, contractors that do the construction on site, but practically all of the other stuff that they do in designing and making sure what the building will look like, they do themselves. So it includes technical design, constructive design, also for instance in installation design they will play a major role. So you can also see their motto. It's about trust, it's about innovation, it's about safety and efficiency. And on the bottom you can also see the main argument that they have. A building is not a product but a work of art. So this is a very different idea of what the network should do compared to the other two examples that we had. And there it was more making a product specification. Here the idea is we still want to hang on to this idea that design is very important in the building sector, but in order to make it more efficient and more innovative, we work together with durable partners in doing the work. Now this is a picture of their current European headquarters, and from this picture and from the picture on the previous slide, you can already see that design is an important element in the buildings that they build. And of course the buildings look different than the ones that we saw, for instance, from the Unidec Volumebouw example as the first example. Now this slide indicates the kind of services that they provide. So the label is design and engineering, and on the bottom you can see all the different things that they do. So of course it's about architectural and engineering and structural design. So that's also the structure of the building, how that is designed. Building services design, installations design, even urban and landscape design. So it's not only about the building itself, but also the surrounding of the building. Plant engineering, all kinds of different activities that they do within the company. So it's integration of different services that would usually be done by different companies, but they integrate it in one design company. And of course you could see that also as a form of hierarchy. Yeah? Hierarchy is the idea that you do different tasks within one company, and they do that. The only reason why we would not call this an example of full hierarchy is that the actual realization of the building, so the building process, they don't do that themselves. They have selected partners to do the actual construction work. Now, if we look at the governance arrangements of these examples, they are also described in the paper. We can see that there are some elements of hierarchy. There's a dominant actor that is leading the way in the coalition, and of course that facilitates specific investments, increasing asset specificity, as we have been discussing. It distinguishes the actor, or rather the group of actors, from their competitors, so it enables them to have branding. It reduces all kinds of transaction costs. It increases trust. It increases quality by improved coordination, less mistakes. Of course, there is a drawback in terms of flexibility. And of course, this differs a lot between the different examples. The last example of the design company, there is still a lot of flexibility. The other examples, the flexibility is much less. But they provide a position on the market by making it more cheap and more quality in terms of the products, at least in terms of quality price ratio. So yes, there are some elements of hierarchy, but in the end they should be described as networks because there are several companies involved, and the networks are aiming at, as already indicated, product specialization, value creation, cost reduction, prolonged relations, and trust. And this is how they become successful in doing their work. Now, if we look at these examples, it's good to understand that the governance in networks, how you arrange your governance, can still be done in different ways. Up till now, we've seen network governance as a general type, specific type that is compared to hierarchies and markets. But within networks, you can still organize your governance in different ways. And in the literature and in research, different types are distinguished. And two important ones I want to share with you. The first is, and it's the distinction between shared governance and lead organization. Now, the idea of shared governance is that all participants, all members of the network, participate in the governance of the network. So they make decisions together in a more or less equal basis, and that's indicated by the example of a round table where the different partners meet together and take decisions. Now, the idea of lead organization is that there is one central organization that takes the lead and coordinates activity. It's not a hierarchical organization in the sense that it can decide on its own what has to be done. It's still consulting the other partners, but it does take the lead in terms of organizing the work. Of course, you need a rather powerful actor in terms of the resources that the actor has. Of course, also the actor needs to be trusted by the other partners because it plays a more important role than the separate partners that are in the network. And of course, as you understand, the examples that we have been discussing in the paper so far, they are all three examples of lead organization. There is one organization that takes the lead in coordinating the activity. And so it's a little bit different than examples of shared governance where all the partners are more or less on an equal basis participating in the governance. It's time to move to the second paper, which is about the influence of network governance on business competitiveness. It's a recent paper and it's based on research that is recently done. The previous paper was, of course, somewhat older, but that doesn't mean that the examples that are given are outdated. They are still relevant today, and some of those network strategies that are chosen by companies are used much more often than was previously the case. So, for instance, building from a catalog houses is much more common, at least in the Netherlands, than used to be at the time when the paper was written. So the second paper basically answers three questions. The first one is, which network techniques do companies use? The second one, which results, which goals are they aiming for? And of course the most interesting one is, do the techniques actually contribute to reaching those goals? Now let's start with the network techniques that companies use. In the paper, they describe 31 different things that companies can do in order to increase their performance. So they are labeled as performance measures. So they are things they do in order to improve the work that they do. Now, of course, I'm not going to describe all these 31. You can read them in the paper. The basic contribution of the paper is that it summarizes all these different things that they do in 5 more general techniques. And they are labeled according to the bullet points that we see. So the first one is supporting information exchange. Of course, if you have to work together on a general level, you have to know what partners you have. So on a general level, there are systems for exchanging information between the different partners in the network. The next one is organizing project communication. This is really the communication that is done on site. So within the project, there are all kinds of project meetings and things that need to be discussed. This is not on general, but this is like what people are doing on site and in the construction site. Then there is sharing of knowledge for collaboration. The idea is that knowledge is shared not only in order to do the specific work on the operational level and in the construction site, but also sharing knowledge in order to improve collaboration between the different partners. So this is labeled sharing knowledge for collaboration. And this is also related to the idea of promoting a network culture. So a network culture is about the way in which you work together, getting to know each other, getting to trust each other, and the companies can take activities that are aiming to improve that. The last one is creating learning capacity. One of the aims of working together is to learn from each other and to innovate, to produce new stuff, and a number of activities are aiming to increase that learning capacity. The second part of the paper is about the categorization of the different goals that the companies are aiming for when they work together. Again, there are many different network outcomes that are described, 34 of them, and also they are described in the paper, and they are also summarized in 7 competitiveness outcomes. Management capability is the first one. Of course, the basic idea of governance is that you are able to manage your work and coordinate it, and that's about a management capability. You work together in order to share the different resources and to be able to have enough resources to do the work. So getting the organizational resources is the next one. As a group of actors, you still have to bid for getting the work that you do, because on a general level you compete with other companies on the market for getting work. So bidding performance is the next important one. The companies are aiming for technological innovation, so whether you reach technological advancement or not is the next one. You aim for different competitive strategies. Of course, bidding is a part of competition, but you can have different competitive, more general competitive strategies as well. For instance, developing your own brand of products might be a strategy that is seen as a competitive strategy that is more general than the bidding performance. You want to organize your work in a structural way, so creating a decent organizational structure is the next one. And of course, the idea of working together in a network is that you want to develop sustainable relations between the different partners. So that's the final one that is distinguished in the paper. Now, the interesting question is, of course, do all these strategies really contribute to the goals that they are aiming for? And in general, the short answer is yes, but not all contribute, and not always do they contribute. Now, the analysis in the paper is based on multiple regression. We don't want you to understand all the details of multiple regression analysis. That's rather technical. If you're interested, of course, you can study that. here we focus on the results that are there, this is a more general remark I can make. The papers that we provide in this course, we are mainly interested in the theories that are presented and the results in terms of research. We don't expect you to understand all the basics of the particular research methods and the way in which the research has been done. It's more about the theory and the results that come from the research. Now, if we look at the results, there are two strategies that work for all outcomes: supporting information exchange and organizing project communication. So this is general information exchange and meetings on-site in the projects. They play a major role in all different outcomes. So all the 7 outcomes that were distinguished, they are reached to a certain extent by using these strategies. Creating learning capacity plays only a role for bidding performance and competitive strategies. So this is really the question of how successful you are in terms of your market position, both on a general level but also in your bidding performance. Sharing knowledge for collaboration only works for management capability and organizational structure. So these are more like internal effects in terms of how you manage your work and how you organize your work, rather than doing the actual work in terms of the construction on the construction site. Promoting network culture does not show any effect in terms of the goals that the companies were aiming for. So one of the lessons that we learned from this paper, that the expected results in theory do not always appear in practice. Sometimes they do appear and sometimes they don't. So don't think too lightly in terms of when you read a certain paper that the things that are expected in the theory always appear in practice. Of course, there's a but. This is one investigation in a specific context. Yeah, so it might be that if you do research in another context with other companies in another country with other tasks, it might appear differently. So also, if you have a result in terms of research and it indicates that something does not work, it might still work in other situations. So be open to that. So it's time to wrap things up. In this micro lecture, we discussed a couple of examples of network governance in the construction sector. Basically, there were 3 examples of what we call lead organization network governance, and the lead organization was of a different type. One of them in the materials production company, one of them in a construction company, and the other in a design company. We also discussed a recent paper investigating the results of network governance on business competitiveness, and it provided a categorization of different things that companies do in order to improve their network functioning, and an indication to the extent to which they were effective in having results in terms of different outcomes that they were aiming for.